Okay. Should I just start?
Yeah.
Okay. So hi, I'm Joe, as you've probably been gathering from that. And also bear with me because I thought I'd see my laptop, but I can't. So I'm going to try and do it off my phone, which is going to go terribly. But yeah, I'm Joe. I'm a computational artist around London. Although primarily in the next year I'm more kind of north where the air's a bit clearer and people are happier. But I'll be back around London probably in like February. But you might recognise me from Goldsmiths. I just graduated, well, I graduate this summer hopefully, in Computational Arts, which is that weird course at Goldsmiths that nobody really understands what it is, who's on it. There's like 10 of us, and we're like in between the art department and the computer department, and everyone hates us. But that's essentially where I'm graduating from. And I create computational art, which is this weird sector of arts that people don't really know what it is. And the most common thing I get is it graphic design? And it's not. You could consider it to be part of graphic design, but the best way of describing it is it's more of a kind of a category that anything that has a computational element and something cool in it can fit into computational art. So it can be dance, it can be poetry, it can be anything. And you'll see my work is weird and kind of doesn't fit in anything, which is computational art. But yeah, this is JoJo. So this is from my most recent pieces. You might have seen around Goldsmiths, and it's this computational baby, essentially. So it's a baby that you talk to. It understands, it responds, and it tries to learn how to talk based on what you say to it, which is a creepy concept that is really strange to see in real life. In reality, it's a full sculpture that's completely hand sculpted. It is child size, it comes through about here. And it's a clay sculpt that's then cast into like this polymer and this plastic, which then is projected so it can look around, talk, blink, everything that you would expect from a really obnoxious, horrible little child. And essentially you stare at it and you ask it absolutely anything, it'll respond in this really horrible American like children's voice, and will try to understand what you're saying, what would be an appropriate response. But also, if you're really horrible to it, the likelihood is it's probably going to be horrible back to you. And it's kind of a tit-for-tat kind of interesting child. Cool, so this is pretty much the child, and you can see what I mean by it being a very, very strangely detailed sculpt. And it's completely clay sculpt, then porcelain, and then it's also, what you're seeing here is like a polymer resin. And by creating this very strange resin, I'm not really going to tell you how I do it, but you can create unbelievable detail. And I mean really unbelievable. You can see the stitches, and the kind of precision we're talking about is about 0.5 millimeters in a cast, which is ridiculous to get when you use latex and polymer. But the other really, really unexpected but cool side is that the mixture of resin actually glows when you project on it, which means when you use a projection mapping where you get a digital projector and project onto the sculpture, this child has this weird eerie glow, which makes it kind of look like a kind of a cartoon ghost, but is really, really fun. And the idea is that by creating this polymer shell, you can actually fill it full of expanding foam, and it's super light, which is better than my other pieces, because if you have to carry around a small decapitated child on the tube, people give you weird looks. But yeah, do you want to switch? Cool. And you might have thought that it sounds kind of familiar, this whole chatbot that talked back to you. And that's because there's a Microsoft bot called Tay, do you want to switch? Which, has anyone seen this before? It's brilliant. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's this bot that the Microsoft released, thinking it was a good idea to let Twitter train a bot how to talk. Which is stupid, because within 28 hours, it became a Nazi. It became a racist, misogynist, Nazi arsehole, which was just wonderful. And they did this 4 times. They actually took it away. And then they went, oh, we're going to retrain it, we're going to retrain it. They did it again, or even worse. They did it again. They accidentally released it the 4th time, and it started talking about drugs within 5 minutes and denying the Holocaust, which is just brilliant and terrible, but brilliant. And that's the kind of idea of why I wanted to see if you could do this with a child. Because the one thing that we lack with Twitter is that kind of common aspect of you don't see someone face to face. So it's a lot easier to say something horrible to someone you're never going to meet in real life, potentially, especially with a bot, which you're never going to meet. But if you're looking at this small innocent child that blinks and asks you what's going on in the world, you're going to be an absolute arsehole to it. And I think we can probably imagine what happened. Do you want to switch it? We destroyed it. We completely destroyed the child. So I displayed this for 4 days in Goldsmiths. It started off a completely lovely, innocent child that talked about puppies. And it was trained on internet corpus of data. So it was trained on how kids talk and that kind of thing. And it was really innocent. It says there 64% negative skew. That's within normal boundaries. People tend to be more negative than positive in the English vocabulary. 64 is pretty much average. To be honest, about 70% is kind of common. In 2 weeks, or should I go back?
I'm sorry.
In 2 weeks, it was 89% skew, which means it's a horrible child. And all it talked about was guns, pro-gun, Soviet Union, Russia, communism, and UFOs. And constantly asked when will Putin invade? Tell me about communism and why am I so short? And why am I so short is one tutor of mine came in and berated this child for about 60 minutes about it being short arts and how she hated it, which is completely down to her. But it went insane. And you can tell from this weird conspiracy theory on Volvos and communism and how people want to keep their Volvos that it went from this really innocent, lovely child to, I don't even know, some weird, twisted thing. So very similar to the Tay. And it also proved that people can be horrible to children. Yeah.
So I'm just a bit confused. So this baby can speak with its mouth, or is it coming up on the screen?
Oh, okay, yeah, good idea. So it comes up in 2 ways. So it comes up on the screen live while it talks, but it will auditory say everything in a child's voice, in a child's manner. So if you say, "Hi Jojo, what are you doing?" it'll go, "Hey, I'm Jojo," or like communism from people who want to keep their vulvas. So it's completely like interacting with a child, which is the point, because I wanted to test what were people's boundaries when you take something that's highly influenceable in like the Twitter and you put it into real life. Are people going to gang around this child and teach it horrible, horrible things, which people do, because people are assholes. And this was kind of my first kind of dive into that. If you want to switch the thing. Yeah, there's a lot of psychology in every single thing I do. And the reason for it, I think, is really that I want to make, the one goal I try and stick to is to make topics that are otherwise inaccessible, accessible to everyone, which is just my main kind of keep me grounded, don't go insane. And it's brilliant because everyone can hate a piece of artwork, and that promotes discussion. Or everyone can love a piece of artwork, and it can be divisive. That way you can connect people who just do not want to disagree with each other. They can disagree with each other over a piece of artwork and no one feels harmed. That way you can talk about a number of topics that people just don't want to talk about, mainly politics, because who wants to talk about politics unless you're in Goldsmiths? And this is the way I do it. And also people listen when they're scared or surprised. So if you scare someone shitless, they're going to listen to you. But they're also going to gang around your idea and question it, which is what you want in art, because you always want to get questioning art, because what's the point otherwise? Yeah, do you want to go on? Yeah, cool. This was probably the most manipulative piece that I've ever made in my life, and it was the most fun manipulative piece I've ever made in my life. And it was thankfully funded by King's LSPU and in now, but the Justice Syndicate is a strange piece because it's interactive theatre and it is highly manipulative but quietly, whereas the Joe piece was just in your face. Let's see how crazy I can make someone beat this child. This was just purely coincidence. Do you want to switch again? So the idea is, this piece takes 12 random people, you sit around a room, you are jurors for this completely fictional case that we created about this very, very popular and powerful Dr. Simon Huxtable. He's a child physician, operates on this rare form of childhood cancer. He's like the only person in the world who can actually cure these children. But he's notoriously shady, and people have constantly accused him of inappropriate behaviour and sexual assault, and that's the case. And you're left with this horrible decision of, this is someone, and like the only one who can cure all these children, but is he an arsehole, and should he be locked up? What will happen to the children? And it's really dark, and there's a theme, because most of my work is really dark. But the idea is that you get presented all this evidence through tablets, you're left completely alone, and you discuss this case. And we have everything from court documents, blood tests, you've got a ton of evidence, and you're left to just discuss with these 12 people you've never met what the hell is going on, and do we think this guy did it? And there's something really quite beautiful in that, because you start to see how people interact with each other when they don't know each other and you're talking about incredibly public and sensitive topics. If you're talking about sexual assault, you would think that immediately what you do is you go, right, okay, he's an arsehole by default, convicted. But that doesn't actually always happen. Some people are like, oh no, he's a nice guy, he's a nice guy. Which, how can you see that? But if you want to switch it here, you sit around a table in an incredibly daunting setting, and it's intentional. We choose like the most horrible, daunting rooming kings with a bunch of really horrible dead white guys on the wall, just to really be intimidating. And that's the whole point of it. If you switch it again, and this is what we found out. We're predictable. We're completely predictable. There's someone with the jury. They typically sit in juror 1 chair. They just go and sit in the number 1 chair every single time. People will lean towards the naturally formed leader's decision, no matter what that is, or even if we plant it. And leaders change throughout the entire piece, with people hating each other and people going, that guy's an asshole now. I'm going to try and sway the entire group towards someone else. And that's really fun to watch. But the manipulative part is that the evidence presented is completely neutral. There is no, he's guilty, he's not guilty. There's no evidence to convict him. There's no evidence not to suggest that he might have done it. The only piece of bias is what we form in psychology. So we worked with a neuroscientist from clinics to embed natural bias within the piece. We just do stupid little tiny things like change the evidence so his room, the pictures of his room, go from incredibly clean, but on one jury they're clean, the other jury they're really dirty. If he's got a dirty room, suddenly people want to convict him. Or if he, stupid tiny things like, if he mentions so he goes in his testimony, I've had such a horrible time with this, instead of saying, I really sympathise with, instantly people convict. And that's the most beautiful little thing, is that we can sway an entire jury towards guilty, not guilty, 100% of the time, completely without anyone realising. If you go to the next slide, I think it says, yeah, the next one, yeah, it's the next. Yeah, so it's all because of confirmation bias, and I promise you I'm going to get back to answer in a second. But this is really fun, because essentially, if you think someone's guilty, through any number of suggestions, you will go out of your way, no matter what the evidence says, to make him guilty. So there could be a bunch of evidence that says not guilty. You think he's guilty, you're going to see it as guilty. And that never changes. That's almost impossible to break the habit. I did this, I wrote, there's 4 people involved in this, and we wrote a ton of really horrible testimonies. I wrote all the really horrible ones that suggest he's guilty. I still can't get out of my head that he's guilty. Every time I've thought about this piece, I think he's an arsehole. But everyone else who wrote the nice bits think he's lovely. And that just doesn't change. And that's the most beautiful part of this, is that we can swing a jury from 100% guilty, so 12 jurors that have never met each other, to 83% not guilty within an hour by selective presenting of different evidence and small little bias things like that, which is terrifying, because we've managed to find a way of connecting 12 random people with a common ground of making them hate a character that doesn't exist. And if you can do that, you can convince anyone of anything, which is terrifying. And wonderful, really. Do you want to switch? Yeah, so there's a really creepy documentary about this next month on that. And it's being shown constantly around the UK. It'll be back at King's. It's a really fun miniature piece to try. If you ever want to try and, I don't know, you don't need to know about the legal system, but it's really fun. It's also really fun to see what people think and how they react to such a horrible piece of news. But do you want to switch it again? Yeah, so if you want to see anything else, the best bet is go to my site. I've got like ridiculously long, some technical, some art theoretical write-ups of pretty much everything I do, as well as like videos and things like that. Or send me an email or things like that. I should be around. I've got a few shows in Mile End and a few other places from Goldsmiths and North London over the next 2 months. And I think the Justice Centre is coming back in like February 2019, somewhere in London in a theatre somewhere. But that is pretty much my work. But feel free to have a look at more stuff. Yeah, unless there's any questions. That's the competition part. Yeah.
Do you think Jojo would work the same way if you took him out of like a university setting and put him like in the public, or was he already in the public?
Yeah, massively. I was playing the Goldsmiths setting massively, because I knew that Goldsmiths students and everyone who comes to a degree show is probably going to be a bit more on the political leaning, and they're also maybe going to have a bit more fun with it if it was somewhere a little bit more fun. So I think that's probably why we had such a strong negative reaction, that we went from lovely child to devil child within a week. Whether or not that would be different, I think that would be different if it was a different environment, like up north. When I've tried pieces like this before, it tends to be a bit more passive, because you don't get the same angst, maybe. But in a public setting, it's whether or not, I think it would actually increase the effect, if anything. Because what I was trying to do is trying to hype up and make someone be able to talk to a horrible child. So the idea was, I set it up so you had to talk to his ear behind it. So you never looked in his eyes. It was whole set up so you never confronted the child where you said horrible things. And that allows people to be inherently horrible, because you'll quite easily say something horrible about someone behind their back, but as soon as you look at them, no chance. And that still even happens with fake projection out children, because I tested it. And people were predominantly nice when you had to stare at his eyes and tell it it's a horrible person. And if you taunt a child and it looks at you and it cries, you're not going to do it. But if you talk to behind his back, it's going to work. In a public setting, I reckon it would just only increase the effects. There'll be a kind of mass jaunting, people will just like to hate it. There's this common kind of tendency to rally around and hate something en masse, and that's something I think you would probably see if it was in a public setting. But this will actually be in Nottingham in like 4 or 5 weeks in a mass public setting, of which I'm sure it'll go insane. Who wouldn't insult a small child? Cool. Does it mean? Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe playing with the idea like with the image of a child would be like more, would encourage more people to act more like in a fetishizing way, or like more like, okay, I can teach this child this and that, but instead if you would have had like the image of an adult, how would that sort of dynamic would change?
That's a good point. So my original thinking of doing it, choosing a child, because obviously the Tay thing was kind of this, I think it was supposed to be an American teenager, which funnily, it was actually built off a Chinese book that had run for like 60 million conversations and never once was evil. It's as soon as it was put on Twitter and started to be an American angsty teen that people thought, let's fuck this thing up. But pretty much I chose the child because I wanted it to be the most vulnerable aspect possible. I wanted it to be, there is no bias towards it. You're not going to think, oh, it's an adult, it can deal with this. You're going to go, if you're horrible to a child, there's really no reasonable logic to why you would do that. If I switched it to be an adult, I reckon people would still be quite negative to it, but there wouldn't be that whole aspect of, there's no excitement in a terrible sense of teaching a child a horrible thing. And that, I think, is what fuels the majority of people teaching about communism and, which is very Goldsmiths, I suppose, but things like, someone did teach it to count, and someone taught it basic arithmetic, which occasionally was right. Adorably, he got it wrong occasionally. It would be like 5 + 5 is 4. But it did actually kind of work. So there was an aspect of people being responsible in trying to teach it things. I think regardless of if it was an old man to a young man to anyone, a woman, I think you'd still get the same different intensities of horribleness, to be honest.
You keep sort of saying it's obvious that people would be mean to this child, but
Yeah.
isn't it when it's not a real child? Obviously, that's completely sort of different.
Yeah.
So to refer to it as a child, I mean, I think most people who are looking at it are like very aware of the fact that it's not
A child.
Yeah, it's surely that changes it up, and like people are going to be more mean because they know that it's just fun.
Oh, definitely. But there's a different aspect of it. So it's the whole debate of whether or not we interact with AI and bots constantly. It's like we have Siri and Alexa, which are pretty much anthropomorphized. They're people. You consider them to have personas. You know that Siri is very much kind of clean cut and an Apple, but like Alexa has a very, very kind of corporate Amazon vibe. They're embodiments of brands. And we constantly deal with them so much so that I would argue that at least what I've seen in children is they start to disregard the fact they're not real and incorporate them into typical conversations as if they were a real person. So my cousin, for example, would come up to me and say how Alexa was teaching her these amazing things today. And they don't regard it as not really being particularly human, it's more of an extension to a human. Or it's this entity that's got a large amount of authority. And while I'll never get close to it being an actual child, and I did actually consider, could I get someone's child and get them to recite these things? And I thought, no, that's going to be in the news. But I thought like the closest I could get was creating something that gave off the vulnerable vibe of a child, and that was the closest I'll get. It's true that it was very fake and artificial, but once you heard it talk in a legitimately realistic child's voice and repeat phrases that you would expect from a child, it still, at least I thought, and people who tried it elicited this kind of I'm doing something wrong feeling once you were being horrible, or if you said something that you wouldn't expect to say to a child. There was that small elicitive response. So while it won't be as strong as if it was an actual child, I still think there's an aspect of the reason people were so horrible to it was it's quite fun to break the rules and be horrible to a child, and no one's going to persecute you.
And did you literally code all of the sort of?
Yeah, so I have a rule with all my work, which is that I'll never use something that I didn't make. There's like 3 reasons for that, which is that I want to be truly authentic with everything I make. It's a showcase of what the hell have I been doing for the last 6-7 months. So everything you see, the sculpture, the projection, the technology, the machine learning chatbot, everything is mine. No one's touched it before.
And how did that sort of like, if you were to describe that in a basic sense, how did you what sort of inputs and like how are you making that sort of exchange work? Like how did you start?
Talking.
Yeah.
So if you imagine, everyone knows what an Alexa is, yeah? Everyone knows Amazon Alexa, you talk to it. So the idea is that you go response, processing, response. That's the basic premise of McAlister. So what I did was try to mimic that as closely as possible within this child, but factor in things that you would expect from the child. So they might be a little bit difficult to talk to, they might be a bit off topic. I factored that in. So in technical terms, I'll do it really quickly because no one wants to know technical terms, but it is text to speech. No, it's speech, speech to text, chatbot, machine learning, learning, text out, text to speech. That's the system, and it's almost identical to what Amazon would use, but it's my own version. It's almost identical to Tay, from what I've seen of Tay's source code, because it's not public, but I know a few developers in Microsoft. But mine is less susceptible to what Tay was susceptible to, was repetition. If you said to Tay something horrible, like, well, I'm going to say something horrible. If you told it the sky was orange 20 times, eventually they're going to say, oh, the sky's orange. That didn't really exist with Jojo. It was much more manipulative in the sense that if you wanted to teach him something, you had to give it a good correlation to a topic. I've heard that the sky is turning orange soon. What do you think of that? Something a bit more advanced that a child would actually pick up. But that's the technology. The technology behind this is pretty insane. It's like 150,000 lines of code, about a year's worth of work. And it's pretty advanced. And the other reason that I do, there's two more reasons that I do my own code, which is that I want to try and make the experience that I expect to be as tailored as possible. Control freak, I want everything to be exactly how I expect it. And I want it to stand out because no one else has a system, no one else has a childlike AI that's public. I do. And that's what makes this piece so unusual and difficult for other people just to create a mimic copy. Also, if you create work with other people's code, the likelihood is it's probably going to be discontinued later, and you can't keep showing the piece. I've been burnt by that a long time in the past. So it's always good to keep your own stuff.